This is Queensland's commuter rail network, connecting the Gold Coast, Ipswich, and even Gympie, with Brisbane as the central hub. It's not Tokyo or Paris good, but in car-choked Australian cities, it's a lifeline. Network expansions are rare, but when they happen, the public loves them, with ridership increasing as soon as they open. Except one new rail project that was great on paper, but was so disastrous, it broke the train network, forced high-profile resignations, and nearly trashed Brisbane's reputation on the world stage. I'm talking about the Redcliffe Peninsula Line. The Redcliffe Peninsula Line, also known as the Moreton Bay Rail Link or the Kippa Ring Line, is a project that's been on the drawing board for well over a century. Discussions about building it date all the way back to 1895, where they want to connect the new suburbs and areas of the growing Redcliffe to Brisbane. Today, the line stretches about 12 kilometres, with 6 stations finishing at Kippa Ring, frustratingly just 4 kilometres shy of Redcliffe itself, with its waterfront and beaches, which is where people actually want to go. But hey, that's a story for another time I really need to speak about. After more than 100 years of hesitation, delays, and political back and forth, the line finally opened on October 4th, 2016. I'm not going to rattle off every dull fact you can already find on Wikipedia, unlike some other urbanist YouTubers. Shots fired. This is a video about a rail line and a rail expansion that seems so great on paper, but its execution was so bad. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to start with the really mundane stuff of what caused this line to be a catastrophe. Before the line even opened, issues had already cropped up. Since it was a greenfield project, builders had to carve out a brand new corridor through wetlands and waterways, with embankments and service roads that blocked natural drainage. That didn't seem like a big deal until 2015, when a 1 in 100 year flood hit. With storm water paths disrupted, the embankments funneled water into the wrong places, worsening local flooding. The studies later confirmed the new rail works made things worse, though no compensation was paid to affected homeowners. Not a huge issue, but certainly a bad omen for what's to come. Apart from the minor issue of flooding people's homes, construction of the new line was progressing quite swimmingly from its January 2014 start date. In fact, construction was going so well that in early 2015, the expected opening of the line was brought forward to early 2016, nearly half a year earlier than the estimated mid-2016 opening period. An expedited opening of a construction project in Australia is nearly unheard of and not part of regular programming of delayed project and cost overruns. Perhaps the new management decision to pull the project away from the Queensland Rail and give it to the other Department of Transport and Main Roads really paid off. Well, yeah, the initial teasing of early delivery was just that. Someone clearly got ahead of themselves, because in late 2015, the project was pushed back to its original mid-2016 open date. But even worse, a few months later, the project was delayed again to late 2016. Now, this is in total a 6-month delay, but it's indicative of something worse. The cause of this delay? A signalling failure before the line even opens. Someone had realized that the signalling system being installed on a new line was not completely compatible with the existing signalling equipment, and would have resulted in significantly reduced throughput of trains and major safety issues such as trains potentially crashing into one another. Now that's a big oof. Whilst cars crashing into each other have been an accepted side effect of personal transport, the railway industry has worked extremely hard over the years to prevent such crashes from happening. So it's generally an understandable decision to delay a major train line opening by 6 months in order to prevent a 19th century problem from happening in the computer age of the 21st century. Now, who to blame exactly for this mild fumble, we will get into that later. But before I cover the final cock-up, I just want to remind you to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Your support definitely affects my upload schedule, because if I get enough support, I cancel date night with the missus to make videos. Now, after the relatively embarrassing fumble of not being able to get the train signaling correct, something that has been pretty easy since before the computer age, QR and the government's embarrassment was bested by a damning revelation shortly after the line opened on the 4th of October, 2016. Just 3 days after the fanfare of this century in the making line finally opening, the government was hit with a bombshell. On October 7th, 2016, Queensland Rail formally notified the government that there weren't enough train drivers to operate the new line and the other parts of the network simultaneously. What's worse, QR was operating on borrowed time, because once the existing staff maxed out their allowable overtime, services across the network would begin to collapse, with mass cancellations and brutal delays as a result. This was a seismic foobar to astronomical proportions. The government was whipped into a critical panic response, but alas, their options were extremely limited, because unfortunately, Queensland train drivers take 18 months to properly train from scratch, far more than other cities around the country and even the world, and they're not exactly able to be bought off the shelf or imported from overseas. Now, this time was far longer than the weeks or even days the government had to fix the shortage, and unfortunately, they could only sit back and watch, because as the days ticked on following the revelation, train services started to fall, with periodic daily cancellations on the network, with the first major shockwave coming on the 21st of October, 2016.
The Premier's not happy. CEO of Queensland Rail, Helen Glua, is with us now this morning. Helen, good morning. What went wrong?
Good morning, Sylvia. So can I start off by saying that what's gone wrong is when we've opened these new services from the 4th of October, we have underestimated the amount of training that was going to need to happen on opening that new line. So we have a resourcing issue there. We have tried everything we can for the last 3 weeks to get it back to our normal high standards of running. That hasn't worked, so we're putting in place an interim timetable to make sure that our customers can go back to expecting the normal high services that we provide.
Due to the new train line and staffing issues, Queensland had no choice but to cancel 167 train services in a single day, representing about 12% of that Friday's service. It was a bloodbath. Queensland Rail, government, and anyone related to the problem went into absolute overdrive. QR took this rail fail very seriously by posting a very important announcement on Twitter. But the aftershocks weren't over. You see, the network got a brief reprieve once drivers finished their mandatory rest periods from too much overtime. But that was just the calm before the storm. All the cancellations and disruptions built up to Queensland Rail's true D-Day, Christmas Day 2016. On this day, a combination of lack of drivers reaching their overtime maximum, planned days off from drivers, and driver sicknesses resulted in Queensland Rail being forced to cancel 261 services on a single day. This is absolutely unheard of outside of natural disasters. This represents just over a third of the total daily planned services for Christmas Day of 2016. It was a catastrophe for anyone taking trains. Though the bus network still did operate as intended, and its stupidity of council-run buses competing with trains actually somewhat paid off because buses run massive long routes along the train lines just to compete with them. Now, I spoke about this in the previous video if you want to check it out in my previous Brisbane Metro video. Now, QR and the government scrambled to rework the timetables last minute. They had to cut services in an attempt to avoid daily cancellations. Between 4th of October 2016 and February 2017, QR rolled out 5 separate timetable revisions in a frantic bid at damage control and to give commuters some certainty in planning their journeys. Each of these timetable revisions costed about $30,000 each, but the damage was already done, and the debacle soon claimed its first victims, beyond just the passengers. The CEO of Queensland Rail at the time, Helen Glua, who was on a salary of over $500,000, and the chairman of QR, Michael Klug, both resigned in disgrace shortly after admitting fault for such a simple but catastrophic oversight. The pieces were then left to be picked up by whoever was left amongst the governmental infighting, and the public to accept that for the next 2.5 years, they must accept a reduced level of service until driver numbers can be adequately recovered. The opening of this near 100-year-long legacy went up in flames, and it was eventually dubbed the rail fail. Now, where did this all go wrong? Who shall we point the finger at? And these are all valid questions people were itching to find out amongst the immense blame game that kicked off following these events. Of course, the politicians were first in the firing line, but even this blame game wasn't so easy, as the Redcliffe Line project construction started in 2014 under the LNP government led by Campbell Newman. Yeah, that guy that planted the seed for Brisbane's Metro not Metro, as well as replacing government buildings with a giant casino that was pretty much broke before it opened. But the project finished with the Labor government in power, with Anastasia Palaszczuk as Premier. Both sides blamed each other for the signalling failures and driver shortage. Fortunately, there were multiple reviews into the signalling and driver shortage debacle that we sifted through and saw who really was at fault. I mean, yeah, apart from the CEO and chairman admitting fault, there were a lot of other people in the firing line. Let's start with the signalling issue. Much like any other government IT procurement process, the railway signalling systems aren't complex, but they are complicated. And with this level of complication, especially in the bureaucratic machinery, a lot of things get lost in translation. Without strong management hierarchies and clear responsibilities, things can easily go haywire, which in this case was the first mistake by the Queensland LNP government at the time made under Campbell Newman. So normally, when a new rail line gets built, it's Queensland Rail running the show. I mean, rail is literally in their name, and they've got the technical know-how about trains. But Newman's government, hell-bent on finding efficiencies, switched it up by making TMR the project lead, with QR serving as the technical expertise supplier, with the reasoning of efficiency gains. If the recent efficiency gains of Doge efforts tells us, simply naming your reasons after your objective doesn't guarantee results. And in fact, it usually results in the opposite. The idea here is that most of the new train line is civil works that contain your earthworks, bridges, drainage, services, rail beds, utilities, you get the gist. And these civil works are the wheelhouse of TMR. They pretty much do this every day. When QR constructs a new line, they use TMR standards for pretty much everything, as QR standards costs concern mostly what's on top of the ground, such as the overhead wiring, the rails themselves, technical equipment, etc, etc. Most of the time and money gets spent doing the civil works, the wheelhouse of TMR. So it might make sense to actually give the project lead to TMR, who do this stuff all the time. But an extra layer of complexity gets added when, in typical government department fashion, they just contract the actual work out to a private construction contractor, in this case TIS, now known as CPB, to actually execute the project. Where things started to go wrong was when it actually came to choosing a signaling system, with QR as the technical expertise provider, TMR as project lead, TIS as contractor, and Ansaldo STS as the signaling system supplier. Now, signaling systems technology moves on, and older equipment may have old protocols that either aren't manufactured anymore or don't interface well with modern equipment. QR already had a chosen technology for the signaling system, but to make the tender process more competitive and get a better price from suppliers, QR agreed to open up to the market. They chose a product from an Italian company, Ansaldo, called the macro lock system, as it was cheaper than the specified system they normally use, and it would be able to provide future interfacing possibilities with the various old technologies scattered throughout the network. So far, so good. QR reviewed the new signaling system further and recognized that because it's a new system, they would need to properly learn how to integrate it, and therefore they need more time to implement the system in a relatively new setting. No worries, these IT configuration problems happen. Let's ask the supplier how this works. And the signaling system company Ansaldo assured QR that this system has been reliably implemented in the same capacity elsewhere, and they know how to do it. Don't worry, trust me, bro. Spoiler alert, Ansaldo was bullshitting. And here is where things get worse. QR started to unravel the bullshit given to them by their supplier Ansaldo, and started to realize that their standard off-the-shelf signaling system was actually a highly bespoke one, and needed a high level of configuration for every single train function, ranging from level crossing control to basic safety features. Although one function that did work off the bat was the control of platform screen doors, which QR at that point had none on its entire network. Back and forth started between the project lead TMR, technical expertise QR, and contractor TIS. And in amongst all this pandemonium of talk and blame, somehow it slipped or was miscommunicated to the transport minister that the system was ready. He took this information and ran with it, and announced in early 2016 that the new rail line is ready for a mid-2016 opening. The months following this announcement was pure hell for all parties involved in the project delivery. The infighting was hectic and communication dropped massively, which severely hurt the recovery efforts. But listing every single thing each party did is just a mess, and if you really want to get more detail, you can read the report yourself. But unfortunately, as the day of the mid-2016 opening approached, and after all the panic of realizing they're not going to reach this date, they had to tell the minister again, hey, we're not going to be able to achieve the mid-2016 opening, you've got to delay the project. So the minister had to put the tail between his legs and announce to the public that the train line has been delayed again until late 2016. So, just to summarize quickly, an unholy alliance of inexperience, denial, delay, and corporate spin, with TMR out of depth, QR asleep at the wheel, and contractors dragging their feet, and Ansaldo cashing the check, resulted in the cock-up of something so simple as choosing a signaling system. You can pretty much read the reports about this. They go into real depth about this huge back and forth, a complete miscommunication between all parties, and honestly, there's no YouTube video long enough to show how rubbish this teamwork was. Now, that's the signaling problem. Let's get into the absolute meat of this pie, the driver shortage. When it comes to the driver shortage, things get really spicy. After train services got cancelled harder than 2017 Kevin Spacey, shortly after the rail line's opening, the people were out for blood, and both sides of the political spectrum put themselves squarely on the autistic spectrum to fire shots at each other for cheap political points. That really just resulted in them kicking own goals. This could only be a bad idea for both sides, as that would not result in any winners. Let's review why. Once the crisis erupted in October 2016, and the QR CEO and chairman resigned, the LNP, who had themselves squandered the largest political lead in Queensland history and been voted out of power after just 3 years, were first to attack, accusing the Labor government in office of, for less than 2 years, of failing to properly manage the train drivers. It seemed only natural to blame the incumbent government, especially after it was revealed that Queensland Rail had known about the looming driver shortages as early as March 2013. The Labor government in turn fired back at the LNP, accusing them of failing to train enough drivers in the first place, pointing to a freeze on new driver training introduced in 2014 under their government. And here's the own goal that Labor kicks. Although driver training was restarted after Labor came into office in February 2015, the new class size was so small it would barely cover the natural attrition of workers. This back and forth of bickering and the fallout of the QR train cancellation D-Day continued until a commission of inquiry into the matter was conducted, and its subsequent report was given to the government on the 31st of January 2017. And what this report revealed was damning, but not really for the NLP or Labor, but for QR as a whole. Revelations of poor planning, withheld information, and fragmented governance exposed a culture within Queensland Rail that downplayed risks and left no one clearly accountable, all of which combined to create a perfect storm for system failure. Starting with the pause on driver training in 2014, initially, people blamed the former NLNP government, as they were on a warpath of reducing the Queensland public service by 40,000 jobs. That was highly controversial at the time. However, even though the timings were lining up, there is no evidence that this was a direction given to QR by the LNP government at the time. Although it seems pretty clear what that answer is, because when Labor came to power in 2015, driver training was restarted, although with a tiny class intake of only 5 new drivers. Had this driver training not been paused, QR would have had 30 extra drivers to accommodate the new rail line. But there were more factors at play here that further damaged QR because of a shortage of drivers. Because a shortage of drivers wasn't just an oversight, it was actually deliberate. The undersupply of drivers in QR was a known fact for decades, but efforts to rectify the issue aren't taken seriously, as a structural driver undersupply allows train drivers to leverage lucrative overtime hours. During the whole rail fail debacle, drivers were doing some insane overtime, with one driver clocking in of around $225,000 a year in salary due to overtime hours in 2018. Such a pay packet puts the traditional working class job of a train driver up and above the upper middle class wealthy, so it can be understandable why they wanted to protect overtime hours. While overtime provided a lucrative boost for many train drivers, the deliberate undersupply of crews, combined with restrictive rostering practices and other management practices, began to show serious cracks. Since 2014, key performance indicators of QR started to degrade, as productivity represented as time spent driving the train as a portion of their allotted shift, and unscheduled absence hours amongst drivers started to increase. Even though the state government was only informed of the driver shortage in 2016, QR identified potential driver shortages all the way back in 2013. So it begs the question, why was nothing done by the managerial staff? Now, the Strachan report, done by Philip Strachan, is a large one, and this video has gone on way too long, so I won't rehash boring details, but I'll distill it down to this. QR was a rotten organization with poor management that relied too much on managerial intuition in operations, at the expense of using data when making decisions. There was a strong culture of complacency, rather than taking proactive steps to fix the problem. And finally, management was so scared to bring bad news to ministers. Whether there was a previous history of shooting the messenger is unclear, but very gentle language was used to describe the very disastrous and real problem of driver shortages. In the end, the political points didn't go to either party over this rail fail, but as much as I like blaming politicians, this one was very much hidden from them. Although just one politician resigned over the entire debacle. It was the Transport Minister at the time, Sterling Hinchcliffe, who stepped down shortly after the Strachan report was released. Sure, he is supposed to know what his organization is doing, but when they constantly lie and hide information from him, it only makes his job that much harder. Now, Philip Strachan's Commission of Inquiry was very thorough and damning for the Queensland rail operator, and they had a long road to recovery ahead of them, although the damage wasn't completely done yet. The fallout from the rail fail continued well into 2018, because one more huge challenge remained: servicing the massive transport needs of the 2018 Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. The Commonwealth Games are basically the Olympics for the former British colonies, and a reason for Australia and England to stat pad in every sport. Although it's a scaled down version of the regular Olympics, it's still nonetheless a major drawcard for crowds that demands intense urban planning and infrastructure development to cope with the crowds. Even though these games were located on the Gold Coast, about an hour south of Brisbane, Brisbane served as a major transport nexus for the Gold Coast because of its airport that necessitated high-frequency public transport to the Gold Coast along the Gold Coast rail line to accommodate the hundreds of thousands expected to travel between the two cities. Train frequencies of every 10 minutes were planned, up from the standard 30-minute intervals. But as we've just been discussing, they couldn't even satisfy the load of an extra 12-kilometer rail line. How are they now expected to do every 10 minutes over an 80-kilometer rail line? Well, the answer was easy: cannibalize the network. Even before the Commonwealth Games, QR and the state government were fiddling with rail timetables, cancelling services, and even running replacement buses in order to reduce the overtime being done by QR train drivers in anticipation of the Commonwealth Games. The new Redcliffe line had bus replacements, not for track works, but because they just didn't have enough drivers. And they could save the driver time for the more important routes such as the line to the Gold Coast. Some other lines were dropped to hourly intervals, which is quite frankly rubbish on a high capacity line like the Brisbane trains. It was a pain for commuters and the like, but necessary. Similar to developing nations holding large international events, all resources diverted to the spotlight, whilst the everyday citizens had to suffer. QR did manage to accommodate the influx of visitors and passengers, but the Queensland rail fail had one more ace up its sleeve to claim its final victim. Philip Strachan, the man tasked with investigating the fail, was subsequently appointed as the chairman of the QR board to oversee the recovery efforts, and he did an alright job. Progress was slow, but full scheduled timetables were expected to be reached in mid-2018 with overtime drivers, and without overtime drivers in 2019. After nearly 2 years in the job, Strachan had run a tight ship with his new workforce that replaced the old guard responsible for the failure. So, naturally, to reward them, Strachan signed off on a $3.5 million bonus package deal for the QR execs. Strachan made it clear that those receiving these bonuses weren't those responsible for the failure, but these cries fell on deaf ears. The rail fail was so toxic, people still wanted blood in late 2018. And when it was revealed that the bonuses were dished out, political machinery were not happy and dragged him over the coals, resulting in his fiery 3-sentence resignation letter in early October 2018. The rail fail had claimed its final victim. Today, the Redcliffe Peninsula Line and the rest of the train network is functioning as intended, with major projects about to be completed that will seriously increase the services on the network. And that's the story, how a century-old dream broke Brisbane's trains and shook up the rail operator. What should have been a moment of celebration for the Redcliffe Peninsula Line became a slow-motion train wreck, one that exposed QR's complacency, government missteps, and a culture of hiding bad news. The fallout was brutal. Executives toppled, a minister resigned, commuters suffered years of reduced services, and even the man who cleaned up the mess was eventually forced out. It showed just how fragile the system really was. Not broken by floods or technology alone, but by poor governance and a refusal to face hard truths. In the end, the Redcliffe line did eventually settle into Brisbane's network and serves thousands of commuters every day. But the scars of the rail fail still run deep, and the lessons are a reminder that when it comes to public transport, you can't just cut corners. You can't ignore the warnings, and you sure as hell can't run out of train drivers. I hope you enjoyed this quick expose on something that really shocked Brisbane at the time. I remember reading every day the absolute debacle this was. Look, if you really like this content, once again, like and subscribe, comment, help the algorithm. Got some new stuff, got some Brisbane content coming up soon because I've just returned home, so we're going to be firing that out. Take it easy, and I'll see you next time.